We all float down here. You all float too.
Thomas here with Much Props, going to give you another how-to video. Today I am making something relatively simple. I know Halloween is just around the corner and some of you are starting to get ready for your builds. I thought it would be nice to kind of show you an easy way to make some weapons really quickly. So I'm going to make a cleaver out of foam. And the reason I want to make a cleaver is it's got a nice wide blade so that I can paint a portrait on. I'm going to go super easy with the build, but then kind of go extra with the paint job. I was talking with a guy on Instagram, Robbie Rittenhouse. He goes by Killer Art on Instagram. I'll put links to his stuff down below. After chatting with him back and forth for a while, I went on his actual feed and was looking at some of his stuff, and it's ridiculous. He paints on knives, chainsaws, saw blades, all kinds of different items, and his abilities are pretty mind-blowing. So I thought, why not try my hand at doing something like that? It's a pretty cool idea. And I wanted to think of something that was like traumatic or terrifying as a child or in my life, and clowns kept coming to mind. Yeah, I was pretty terrified of them as a kid. The movie It, Killer Clowns from Outer Space, there was a serial killer who painted himself up as a clown, Ronald McDonald. Yeah, there were lots of reasons. But I decided, why not face my fears and paint Pennywise? I am going to do both, paying homage to Tim Curry, who did the original, and also doing Bill Skarsgård's version. So on one side there'll be the new and the other side will be the old, and I thought that would be a cool homage. So without further ado, today I am building a cleaver with Pennywise portraits out of foam. Rusted up. Let's get to building. I started off by looking at some reference images of cleavers in a Google search just to get an idea of the basic shape. If you're not great at freehanding a shape, you can just as easily print out an image scaled to fit your hand. Or if you happen to have a cleaver laying around your house, just trace it. I got the shape I wanted, made a handle overlay for it, and was ready to trace it onto my materials. I'll put my pattern down in the description below if you'd like to skip all the pattern making process and just use my pattern. Now I take my pattern and trace it onto some dense 6mm EVA foam. You could use different thicknesses or materials for this build as it's flat and pretty simple. With Halloween stuff popping up all over the place in stores now, you could probably even snag a cheap plastic blade to use instead. I use a lot of foam in my builds because I have easy access to it with online stores and hobby stores close by. I have a closet full of different foam just to the left of what you see on camera here. I traced 2 copies of my pattern onto the materials. With a sharp hobby knife, I'm ready to make quick work of this build. I hold my blade perpendicular to the foam surface to try and make one long, clean, full pass all the way through the foam to get the cleanest cut. For the sharp edge of the blade, I tilt my handle back to a 45-degree angle and pull through the foam to make my bevel. This will save me a little bit of time sanding later by cutting it into the blade. To give the blade plenty of support, I'm going to sandwich some fencing wire in between the two pieces. I trace the outline of my wire and cut a V-groove into each side so that the wire can sit within it. With different materials, the support wire may not be necessary, but because the blade is large and it narrows down to a very thin handle, I figured I would go ahead and give it that support it needed, even in dense foam. With contact cement on both sides and the wire in place, I lay down the two halves and firmly push the parts together for a few minutes to make sure they've got a good bond. I pretty much do the same thing with the handle overlays and stick them into place. Then I do a little shaping with my rotary tool to round over the edges and make the handle grip feel better in the hand. Now I'm going to sand in some details like faux rivets on the handle and some gouges in the blades for battle damage. Make sure that you wear a respirator and work in a well ventilated area while sanding EVA foam. You don't want to breathe the particles into your lungs. Believe it or not, this build took me around an hour or so, including the template, recording, and assembly. Two coats of Plastidip. I don't know why, but I went ahead and spray painted it silver as a base coat. It's gonna get covered up. My plan for the paint job on this is to rust the absolute mess out of it. Normally I would just hit a couple of spots here and there, but I wanted this entire blade to be rusted up. For this, I'm using the rust effects from Modern Masters. It's a 3-step process of adding a primer, then a metal layer, and last a solution that starts the rusting process. I love using it because it gives great variations and puts actual rust on my fake weapon. I slather 2 coats of the primer orange color across the whole blade and let it dry outside for an hour or so. The second step in the process is adding a layer of paint that has flecks of iron in it. This layer with the primer actually adds quite a bit of weight to the prop, so it's starting to feel like a legit cleaver. The chemical in this layer does not exactly smell super pleasant, so I like to turn on my air purifier while I'm working with this stuff and then let it dry outside. I got a little impatient with the layers, and this time I decided to hit it with a heat gun instead. Last step of this rust metal effect is the rust solution. I soak it completely, then let it partially dry outside on the hook, and then soak it again. You can play around with the amounts and see how the chemical reacts to figure out what is best for you. You can also just use acrylic paint and fake the rust effect if you wanted to. I also have used red, yellow, and orange spices sprinkled over wet paint to make it look like rust. I have one of those eco tank printers that's great for how little I need to print from time to time, but after it sits for a while, the nozzle gets a little clogged and gives me these weird crappy lines in my print. I didn't want to waste any more ink, so I'm just gonna use these as the reference. I printed them to the size I wanted the head to be on the blade, cut off the parts I didn't need, and then traced the outline of the character on the blade to paint the base and both clowns in white. The rust does seep through, which just kind of adds to that look. You could seal the area with Mod Podge or some other kind of sealant so that the paint doesn't bleed through. Now I am drawing on the details before I start painting it. It's been a long time since I've done a portrait painting, so I'm a bit nervous at this point of messing it up. You could always use trace paper if you wanted to, but I decided I wanted to do my best at trying to do it all by hand. You could completely take a different direction and just decoupage a clean picture on the blade and call it a day. I did it a while back with some boxing gloves, and they turned out pretty cool too. Now time to paint. What's great about painting is you can always just paint over it if you mess up, so keeping that in mind, that gives me less stress. I've watched enough painting tutorials here on YouTube that I'm fairly competent as a painter. In college, I was pretty big into painting, and when we bought our first house after I graduated, I quickly filled our walls with paintings. I know you see me paint props each week, but portrait painting is a completely different skill set. I start with just using black, white, and gray to make my image where I want it to be, then I water down the colors that allow my grayscale image to kind of shine through, so it gives the appearance that I've done all that shading with each of the colors individually. I was a lot more confident when I flipped over to the second Pennywise. The mixture and blending went a lot faster as I slathered down the paint. I really hope everyone likes and shares this video because I would love to do more of these portraits on objects. The Cleaver only took me an hour to build, but I spent the better part of a day painting the rust, which there's a lot of dry time in between, and then doing the portraits. It really was therapeutic to just put on something in the background on my TV and zone out for hours painting. I like to use multiple brushes and the tips of my fingers to spread paint across as I'm working through a piece. With both sides painted, I wanted to add one more final touch to the creepy level of this cleaver. I wanted to use some 5-minute epoxy mixed with a little red and a drop of black acrylic paint to make blood splatter effects on the edges of my blade. Once the epoxy dries, the blood looks forever wet. I use this technique a lot, and it really does add to the realistic look on a foam prop. I'm pretty proud of how this build turned out and hope you enjoyed it too. If you're not a huge fan of clowns, I'm not really either. Just facing some fears and throwing some paint. And we are finished. Here is the end result. Overall, I think it turned out pretty good. It's been a long time since I did portrait paintings, and this was definitely one of those that was like a nice way to jump back into it. I'm only having to do half a face. They're already creepy as can be, so what's there to lose, I guess. I really like the rust effect. It actually adds some weight to it when you put that 3 chemical process on it. And then the blood drips, of course, I had to. It just kind of sells it. Even putting the blood drips on the handle made it kind of nice, but yeah. Maybe you will try and make something like this yourselves and impress your friends with your ability to creep the mess out of them with regular kitchen utensils. Yeah, maybe you'll get some, and inevitably, they're gonna ask you, how'd you make that? You can give them one of these, tell them, much props. It is a weapon. It's a little bloody already, but don't worry, I'll take care of that. I'll wipe it off. All right. If you enjoy what I do here on YouTube and want to see more builds like this one, please consider joining these awesome people listed here with me over on my Patreon to build a bigger, better, more creative community together.